What are you doing on this property?
This is my home. I'm watering my garden.
I need ID. You don't look like you live here.
Officer, I do live here. I'm Judge Patricia Williams.
Yeah? We'll see about that.
It started at 7:23 a.m. on a quiet Tuesday morning in September, the kind of morning where nothing dramatic is supposed to happen. No sirens, no crowds, no urgency. Just the soft hiss of a garden hose, the sound of water hitting soil, and a woman in sweatpants tending to her flowers like she had done countless times before. Judge Patricia Williams was watering her front garden, still in comfortable morning clothes, when a police cruiser rolled into her driveway and stopped with a confidence that didn't match the calm of the neighborhood. She looked up, surprised, but not alarmed. In her mind, a police car pulling in meant one of two things. Either there had been an incident nearby and the officer needed information, or someone had made a report and the officer was following up. Either way, she assumed it would be professional and brief. Officer Leroy Brown stepped out of his vehicle and immediately took a posture that made the situation feel wrong. He didn't greet her politely. He didn't introduce himself in a calm way. He didn't ask if everything was okay. He demanded to know what she was doing on the property, as if she had been caught trespassing. Patricia blinked, genuinely confused. She lifted the watering can slightly, as if the answer was obvious. She told him she was watering her garden. She told him this was her home. Brown looked at the house behind her, then back at her, and the expression on his face made it clear he didn't believe her. He said he needed identification. He said she didn't look like she lived there. That was the first moment the morning shifted. Patricia had seen police misconduct in court files. She had read reports. She had ruled on motions. She had watched lawyers argue about reasonable suspicion and probable cause from behind a bench. But standing in her own driveway, while a stranger in uniform implied she didn't belong in her own home, hit differently. It wasn't theoretical. It wasn't a case. It was personal. Patricia stayed calm. She told Brown again that she lived there, and she asked politely but directly why he was questioning her in the first place. Brown said there had been a call about a suspicious person in the neighborhood. A resident had reportedly seen someone out of place. According to the caller, a black woman in casual clothing had been walking around between properties, possibly casing houses. It would have sounded absurd if it wasn't so familiar. This neighborhood was predominantly white and affluent, and it had been quiet for years. Over the past year, there had been 0 break-ins reported in the area. Most officers considered it an easy assignment. But Brown approached it like he was hunting a threat, and the moment he saw Patricia in casual clothes in a yard that didn't match his assumptions, he decided she fit the description. Instead of checking property records, instead of running the address, instead of confirming the homeowner's name in the system like any careful officer would, he decided to treat her like a suspect first and sort out the facts later. Patricia told him she would get her identification. She walked inside, still thinking a driver's license showing the address would end the misunderstanding instantly. When she returned, she handed Brown her license. It clearly showed her name and the same address they were standing in front of. She also brought out a piece of mail from her kitchen counter with her name and address printed on it. Any reasonable person would have seen that and apologized. But Brown stared at the license, then said it could be fake. Then he looked at the mail and suggested she might have stolen it. That was the moment Patricia understood this was not a normal check. A fake ID claim isn't caution when the address matches the house and the person is standing in the yard holding gardening tools. It's an excuse. It's an attempt to keep suspicion alive even when the facts kill it. Patricia asked him what exactly he believed was happening. Had there been a crime? Was there a specific report? Brown said the call itself was enough, and he claimed she was acting nervous and evasive. Patricia wasn't nervous. She was confused, and now she was angry in the controlled way that comes from being treated unfairly when you've done nothing wrong. She pulled out her phone and started recording. The moment the camera came out, Brown's demeanor changed sharply. He ordered her to put the phone away. Patricia calmly told him she had the right to record police performing their duties in public. Brown stepped closer, invading her space, and said recording was interfering with his investigation. Patricia asked again what exactly he was investigating now that she had shown proof she lived there. Brown said he still wasn't convinced she belonged in the neighborhood and needed to conduct a more thorough investigation. That phrase, more thorough, was the kind of vague language officers used when they wanted time to justify a stop that had no foundation. And Patricia recognized it immediately, not because she was a homeowner being harassed, but because she was a federal judge who had spent 12 years watching questionable police actions get dressed up in official language. Patricia decided to reveal who she was. She expected that would end everything. She told Brown her name and that she was a federal judge. She thought it would reset the interaction back into professionalism, maybe even embarrassment. Instead, Brown laughed. He said if she were really a judge, she wouldn't be dressed like that. She wouldn't be outside in old clothes watering plants. He said he didn't believe her and that claiming to be a judge was probably another lie to avoid trouble. Patricia offered to show him her judicial identification card, but Brown dismissed that too, claiming those could be faked as well. At this point, Brown wasn't investigating anything. He was committing to a belief. He had decided she didn't belong, and he was willing to bend logic until it snapped to prove himself right. Then he escalated again. He said he was going to search her property for evidence of criminal activity. Patricia's tone stayed calm, but it turned sharper. She told him he had no right to search her home without a warrant, no probable cause, no evidence, no legal basis. Brown responded the way officers do when they want compliance more than they want legality. He said her refusal to cooperate made her look more suspicious. That's when neighbors started coming outside. Doors opened, curtains moved. People stepped onto porches because the sound of raised voices and flashing lights in that neighborhood was unusual. Patricia recognized several neighbors immediately. She called out to Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who lived down the street, and asked her to confirm Patricia had lived there for nearly 20 years. Mrs. Henderson walked over and told Brown plainly that Patricia was a longtime resident and a federal judge. Brown dismissed her too. He said neighbors might lie to protect each other. It was spiraling now. Brown was stacking excuses on top of each other, and every excuse was being recorded. Brown then radioed for backup. On the call, he claimed he had encountered a suspicious individual who was being uncooperative and making false claims about her identity. Within minutes, 2 additional patrol cars arrived, and officers Sarah Martinez and David Chen stepped out. The difference between them and Brown was immediate. Martinez approached Patricia calmly, asked what was happening, and listened. Patricia explained she had been watering her garden when Brown arrived, demanded ID, refused to accept proof of residency, and escalated repeatedly without cause. Patricia handed Martinez the license and the mail. Martinez looked at the evidence, looked at the house, looked at the gathered neighbors, and her face tightened with the recognition that something had gone badly wrong. Officer Chen walked over to Brown and asked him quietly what had prompted the initial stop. Brown repeated the suspicious person call, but when Chen asked what specific behavior had been suspicious, Brown's answers turned vague and contradictory. Chen had been an officer for 15 years. He recognized what he was seeing, an officer who had made a biased assumption and now couldn't climb down without admitting it. More neighbors gathered. Patricia's next-door neighbor, Robert Kim, came outside. Robert was an attorney who had known Patricia for years. He provided a detailed reference to Martinez and confirmed Patricia's identity, her position, and her long-standing residency. At this stage, there was no rational path forward for Brown other than to end the interaction and leave. Martinez pulled Brown aside and told him directly that he needed to stop. She said they had overwhelming evidence Patricia was exactly who she claimed to be, and continuing would only make the situation worse. Brown refused. He insisted he wanted to verify Patricia's claim by contacting the courthouse. Even that was unnecessary. But it wasn't about necessity anymore. It was about pride. Brown didn't want to be the officer who backed down in front of neighbors. He didn't want to be the officer who admitted he had targeted an innocent woman for no reason. And then he made a decision so reckless, it stunned even the other officers. Brown told Chen he wasn't satisfied and wanted to arrest Patricia for obstruction of justice. He claimed she had interfered by recording him and refusing to comply with his requests. Chen stared at him in disbelief. He warned Brown it would be the worst decision of his career. Brown didn't listen. He walked toward Patricia again and said she was under arrest. The neighbors gasped. Mrs. Henderson began crying. Robert Kim raised his phone higher and started recording from a closer angle. Patricia stood perfectly still and said she was not resisting, but Brown was violating her constitutional rights. Martinez stepped between Brown and Patricia and told him she would not allow the arrest. Brown tried to move around her and reach for Patricia's arm anyway. The moment he made physical contact, Patricia clearly stated she did not consent to being touched and that she was being unlawfully detained. She asked Brown to state the exact crime she had committed. Brown said obstruction of justice and disorderly conduct. Patricia asked calmly how watering her garden at her own home was disorderly conduct. She asked how providing identification and proof of residency was obstruction. Brown couldn't give coherent answers because there weren't any, but he continued attempting to put her in cuffs. That's when Chen physically intervened. He grabbed Brown's arm and told him to stop. Chen said he would not be part of arresting an innocent woman in her own front yard, especially with no probable cause and no evidence of a crime. For a moment, the conflict wasn't just citizen versus officer. It was officer versus officer, and the street could feel it. Brown finally released Patricia's arm, but he couldn't let go of the situation completely. He tried one last desperate move to save face. He said he was issuing Patricia a citation for disorderly conduct, and that she would have to appear in court. Patricia looked at the citation and immediately noticed it contained incorrect information. The wrong address, an inaccurate description of the incident, details that didn't match reality. She showed it to Martinez, who read it and shook her head. Martinez told Brown the citation was improper and legally insufficient, and issuing a false citation could result in additional charges. Brown crumpled the citation and threw it onto Patricia's lawn. After nearly 45 minutes, the officers finally left. Patricia stood in her driveway surrounded by neighbors, holding her phone with video evidence of everything that had transpired. Her morning routine had turned into a public humiliation, and Brown's behavior had created something much larger than a bad stop. It created a documented civil rights violation. Patricia went inside and immediately began doing what she did best: documenting. While every detail was fresh, she wrote down exact times, specific quotes, and the sequence of events. She uploaded her video to multiple cloud accounts, sent copies to herself, and made sure the evidence couldn't disappear. Then she started making calls. She contacted Internal Affairs. She contacted the State Oversight Board. She contacted the FBI Civil Rights Unit. She contacted Department of Justice channels. She contacted the local district attorney's office. She wasn't going to risk her complaint being buried in the same system that had protected officers like Brown for years. The response was swift. By that afternoon, FBI agents were interviewing Patricia at her home. They reviewed the video, took statements from neighbors, and treated the incident with the seriousness it deserved. A special agent told Patricia that Brown's behavior was among the most egregious examples of racial profiling they'd seen in decades. But the investigation didn't stop at one morning in one driveway. Once federal investigators pulled Brown's file, the real horror showed itself. Brown had received 43 complaints during his career, and 31 involved allegations of racial profiling or excessive force against minorities. Internal Affairs had dismissed or minimized every single one. Complainants were labeled unreliable. Evidence was called insufficient. Brown was repeatedly cleared. Federal investigators discovered Brown had already cost the city over $200,000 in previous settlements hidden behind non-disclosure agreements designed to keep patterns of abuse out of public view. They uncovered a specific pattern. Brown targeted well-dressed black professionals in upscale spaces. A surgeon leaving his own practice. A professor walking on his own campus. A black off-duty officer visiting family. Every incident followed the same script. Immediate suspicion. Refusal to accept identification. Escalation. Then a report written to paint the victim as uncooperative or threatening. Even more disturbing, investigators found that Brown's supervising sergeant had been covering for him, editing reports, coaching him on language to avoid scrutiny, intimidating witnesses, and assigning Brown to minority-heavy areas to handle residents through aggressive policing. Emails showed discussions about which neighborhoods needed more pressure and which people should be treated with extra suspicion. And above them, leadership had been warned repeatedly. The chief had been briefed on Brown's pattern of complaints and chose inaction, prioritizing reputation and quiet settlements over accountability. 3 weeks after the Chi incident, federal agents arrested Officer Leroy Brown at his home. He was charged with deprivation of rights under color of law, a federal crime carrying up to 10 years. His supervising sergeant was arrested the same day on conspiracy and obstruction charges, facing even more time. The chief resigned before he could be fired, but his resignation didn't stop investigators from examining whether his deliberate indifference rose to criminal conduct. The city tried to contain the damage quickly. Patricia was offered an early settlement, hundreds of thousands, because the footage and witness statements made the case indefensible. But Patricia wasn't interested in a quiet payout. She wanted reforms, mandatory body cameras, civilian oversight, transparent complaint procedures, training with real enforcement, limits on NDAs that hid misconduct, systems that protected citizens instead of protecting repeat offenders. As media coverage expanded, other victims came forward. Once the FBI investigation made Brown's conduct public, the NDAs that had silenced people became toothless. City council meetings turned into public interrogations. Residents demanded to know how a man with that complaint history stayed on the street. Businesses raised concerns about liability and reputation. The political pressure became unbearable, and the city's posture shifted from defense to survival. And that's how a simple morning routine, watering a garden, became one of the most expensive lessons in accountability the city would ever learn. The final settlement, combined with related claims and reforms, totaled a staggering $34 million. Careers ended, leadership collapsed, policies changed, training was rewritten, oversight expanded, and the city learned, the hard way, that protecting misconduct is always more expensive than stopping it. Patricia returned to her courtroom without a victory speech, no dramatic interview tour, no public celebration. She simply did what she always did. She enforced the law. But this time the case wasn't in front of her bench. It was in her driveway, on her phone, and in the eyes of her neighbors who watched a system fail in real time. Because the most dangerous part of this story isn't that Officer Brown made a mistake. Mistakes can be corrected. The danger is that he had been doing versions of this for years, and the system allowed it, paid for it, and hid it until he finally targeted someone with the authority, knowledge, and resources to force the truth into daylight. And that's what made that morning unforgettable. Not the flashing lights, not the raised voice, not even the attempted arrest. It was the moment an officer realized he couldn't bully reality. And the moment the city realized it had been protecting him the entire time. If you believe nobody should be treated like a suspect for simply existing in their own home, drop your thoughts in the comments and make sure you're subscribed, because the next story shows just how far accountability can go when the right evidence meets the right pressure.